Okay, this is the video to accompany the third reading from The Problem of Evil, pages 128 through 132, so this will be fairly short. This wasn't a super long reading. It starts with the four logical formulations of the problem of evil on page 128, extending to 129. You have Aquinas' version, Augustine's version, C.S. Lewis's version, and they're all relatively similar and kind of best summed up by the fourth one, which I actually want to focus on. There's a logical contradiction, as it states at the bottom of the page, built into affirming all four of the following propositions. 1, God exists. 2, God is all good. 3, God is all powerful. And 4, evil exists. It would seem, as the book states, if you affirm any 3 of these propositions, then the fourth seemingly can't exist. If God exists, and there are some omnis associated with him, there are some features of God that kind of have to be as a result of his presence, and I'm not going to bother editing this to put it in as a slideshow, so I will simply attach it to the assignment. The 4 omnis are, an omni being Latin for all. These are features of God. God's omniscient, God's omnipresent, God's omnibenevolent, and God is omnipotent. Now, omniscient means all-knowing, meaning he has knowledge of everything. For him, there's no question about anything. He is omnipresent. That's the second omni, meaning he is in all places at all times. So he is in all places simultaneously at all times. He's omnibenevolent, meaning he's all loving. And then finally, he's omnipotent, meaning he's all powerful and he can do whatever he wants. So if you look at that formulation, top of page 129, again, God exists. And then the 2 omnis that factor into this are omnibenevolence and omnipotence. God is all loving. God is all powerful. If you acknowledge that God exists and he wants good for us, and he is powerful enough to allow for all good to be in place, then evil should not exist. But we can make that claim because evil clearly does exist. So in the end, I mean, you can say in the end that he's either not all good, he's not all powerful, or he doesn't exist, because you cannot deny that evil itself actually exists. Now, given the literal mathematical logical formulations of these particular propositions, you have 5 possible outcomes. 1 is atheism. You simply deny proposition 1. God doesn't exist. You have 2, pantheism. This is denial of proposition 2, that God is good and not not evil. Pantheism kind of suggests that God is literally in all things, or more accurately, God is like all of creation. So a plant is God. A dirt speck is God. A mosquito is God. You are God. You can find pantheism in some pagan religions, such as, for instance, there's some variations on Native American religions that would believe in pantheism. You can have modern naturalism or ancient polytheism. Ancient polytheism is like the Greek pantheon, Greek gods. Modern naturalism and actually ancient polytheism can also be found in Native American religions. You'll find variations on naturalism now when you talk about like the idea of Mother Earth. That's a variation on modern naturalism. And this pretty much denies proposition 3. This is God's not omnipotent. And if you go back to your studies in English, you would see that's really kind of true. Zeus, I'm not terribly familiar with the Greek pantheon, but Zeus isn't necessarily all-powerful. And a lot of the lesser gods are certainly also not all-powerful. So God exists in naturalism and polytheism, but he can't do whatever he wants. And that's part of the reason evil exists. 4, idealism states that evil itself does not exist, or that if there is evil, it is actually in and of itself good. If you look at the ancient Asian image of the yin and yang, it's a circle where half of it is black, looking like a fish with a white eye, and then the other half is a black fish with a white eye. This sort of illustrates this concept that in all evil there's actually good that can come of it, and conversely, also in all good there's a kernel of evil associated with it. In short, what idealism states, though, is that evil doesn't actually exist. And then finally, you have biblical theism. This one states that actually all four propositions are valid. And while this seems contradictory, we will eventually get into finding a solution. Now, interestingly, that is largely the bulk of the reading, although there are a couple of things that I want you to focus on. So they talk about 6 methodological principles. I want to focus on some of them. First, I want you to look at number 1 on page 130. We begin with data, not with theories. Theology, like any science, has data. It has basic givens. In addition to experience, both religious and non-religious theology has the data of faith. Skipping ahead a bit, these data are the contents of divine revelation. For example, scriptures are revealed truths. The problem of evil arises from the data, namely the experience of real evil and the revelation of an all-good, all-loving, all-just God who created and omnipotently controls the universe. If either set of data could be denied, the problem is solved. But you can't deny that. Remember, the arguments in favor of the existence of God show that God does exist. Atheism claims he doesn't, but it's literally an illogical position to hold. So you cannot hold that there's atheism, but similarly, you also can't hold with idealism that evil doesn't exist. So you have to grapple with the fact that these two things are in place. Okay. Second, you don't want to minimize, compromise, or water down the data. And he starts to wander off here in talking about, like at the bottom of page 130. On a shallow level, it looks like a question of whether God pulls my strings or whether I pull my own strings. I'm going to revisit this again in the video chat. I don't want to get into it here in a simple video discussion. When it comes to principles 3, 4, and 5, I don't want you to consider those, but I do want you to look at 6. 6 is important. Bottom of page 131. You have to begin with definitions. That is, specifically real definitions, not just nominal ones. Definitions of real things and not arguing over words and usage. Remember when we talked about this a while back? We talked about nominalism. We talked about what do words do? Okay? What do they actually indicate? And it is true that, like, when we talk about, let's see, you can look at a particular thing. In English, we call this a pen. Okay? Now, I don't know what the term is in Spanish. I'm sure there's a term for it. Okay? And perhaps it's somewhat different than the English pen. And a native English speaker who is never exposed to Spanish gets the Spanish term for pen, it's not going to have any meaning for them. Okay? If you speak English, it does have a pen. That phrase, pen, has an associated meaning. A container that holds ink that allows us consequently to transcribe. Now, does the phrase pen, or does the word, the association of sounds, what do we call those things? Phonemes. Right, phonemes from psychology. Does that association of phonemes, does that actually assign the truth of this pen? Or is it simply a name we associate with it? The answer is typically it's just a name we associate with it. If we change the name of the pen, it's not going to alter the pen or ultimately what its function is. And can we change the names? Absolutely, we certainly can. But if you change the names, does it change the meaning of the thing? It does not. Now remember, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago. Nominalism is this notion within philosophy that only meaning comes about strictly through words. We're the ones who actually assign the meaning to all things. We're not talking about nominalism. When we're talking about definitions, we're not talking about whether we're talking about the English term for pen or the Spanish term for pen. It doesn't really, we're not concerned so much with the terms specifically as the underlying truths that the terms indicate. Okay? So when we're talking about definitions, the term, the name, in and of itself isn't so necessarily important, so long, again, as when we're talking about terms, that we all have a common understanding of the truth that underlies that term. Because now we're going to get into terms. That's the next thing we're going to do after your reading this weekend is going to be focusing on this. You're going to be looking at terms like evil. You're going to be looking at terms like freedom. You're going to, rather, free will. What are the other terms? I think I'd have them memorized after 12 years. So you're going to be looking at evil. You're going to be looking at free will. You're going to be looking at omnipotence. You're going to be looking at goodness. You're going to be looking at happiness. Okay? And we're not so necessarily concerned with the terms so much as the underlying truths and meanings that those terms are to reveal. That's important to keep in mind as we move forward. There you go. It wasn't the world's longest video. That's all I got for you. I will see you on Wednesday.